Henry and Mateo thought it would be just another weekend boating trip along the coast. But the sea had other plans. Dark clouds rolled in, waves towered like walls, and their small boat was tossed like a toy. Supplies vanished, water surged over the deck, and the storm threatened to swallow them whole. Hours later, battered and barely alive, they washed up on a deserted island. No food, no shelter, and danger lurking in every shadow. As night fell, the island revealed its true face, and their fight for survival had only just begun. Henry and Mateo, lifelong friends, were full of excitement as they prepared their small boat for a weekend along the remote coastline. The sun was shining, waves sparkled, and the salty breeze promised adventure. They laughed, shared snacks, and talked about the memories they had yet to make on this journey. The boat rocked gently as they pushed off from the shore. At first, everything seemed perfect. Tranquil waters, blue skies, and the endless horizon. They had no idea that danger was slowly creeping in. As they sailed further from land, small ripples in the water began to grow. The wind carried a strange chill. Dark clouds started forming on the horizon, unnoticed at first. The friends were too busy enjoying the ride to notice the ominous signs. Birds scattered in the distance, a subtle warning they did not yet understand. The air, once warm and friendly, began to feel heavy, as though nature itself was preparing for something violent. They laughed it off, thinking a little wind wouldn't matter, unaware of the storm gathering power over the coastline. By the time the first heavy gusts hit, they realized the ocean had transformed into a different world entirely. The once playful waves were now violent, striking their small boat with relentless force. Panic replaced their laughter, and the adventure they had imagined quickly became a fight for survival. The wind howled like a living creature, tearing at the sails and whipping the waves into towering walls of water. Henry and Mateo clung desperately to the boat, their knuckles white and muscles straining against the relentless motion. Rain lashed their faces, blinding them momentarily, and salt water stung their eyes. Every wave seemed intent on swallowing the small vessel whole. The boat rocked violently, throwing supplies and gear across the deck, some of it disappearing beneath the churning waves. Their hearts pounded with fear as they shouted to each other over the roar of the storm, trying to navigate while barely able to see. The wind carried a cold bite that chilled them to the bone, and the sky was a roiling mass of black clouds, lightning slicing through the darkness with terrifying precision. Water flooded the deck, soaking everything and making the boat heavier, more unstable. They bailed frantically, but the relentless ocean gave little mercy. Each wave seemed larger than the last, crashing with unimaginable force. Time blurred. Minutes stretched into hours as the storm showed no signs of relenting. Fatigue clawed at their bodies, but panic kept them moving. Every instinct screamed to survive. Somewhere in the chaos, the coastline disappeared, leaving them surrounded by endless, violent water. Then, against all odds, the boat began drifting toward a shadow on the horizon. A small, dark shape that promised solid ground. Exhausted, battered, and barely conscious, they clung to that hope as the storm finally relented, leaving them floating toward an unknown island. The storm had passed, leaving the sea deceptively calm, yet the aftermath of chaos lingered in Henry and Mateo's exhausted bodies. Their small boat, battered and leaking, drifted slowly toward a dark silhouette against the horizon. As they neared, the outline became clearer. A small, deserted island fringed with jagged rocks and dense, untamed trees. Relief washed over them for only a moment before reality set in. The island was uninhabited, silent except for the distant crash of waves against the shore. They scrambled onto the rocky beach, soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably, and surveyed their surroundings. No signs of life, no footprints, no smoke, no shelters. Only the raw wilderness waiting to test them. The beach was littered with debris from their boat, their supplies lost to the storm. Hunger, exhaustion, and the lingering fear of the sea gnawed at them. They knew they couldn't stay on the beach long. The dense forest behind the sand promised shelter but also unknown dangers. Together, they dragged the remains of their boat to higher ground, salvaging what little they could. some rope, a broken paddle, and scraps of cloth. They needed a plan. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the island, they realized the night would be mercilessly cold. Shivering, they gathered branches and leaves to construct a makeshift hut, huddling together for warmth. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, a distant bird call, the pounding waves, reminded them they were utterly alone, entirely at the mercy of the island. Survival had just begun. Darkness fell quickly over the island, swallowing the small hut Henry and Mateo had built from branches and leaves. The forest around them seemed alive, full of sounds that made their hearts race. Rustling leaves, distant shrieks, and the constant pounding of waves against the rocks. Huddled together for warmth, they tried to keep their minds busy, whispering plans for survival and keeping each other calm. The wind carried strange scents from the forest, some sweet and edible, others sharp and threatening. Henry volunteered to take the first watch, hoping to scout the area for anything they could eat. With a makeshift torch in hand, he stepped into the dense undergrowth, every snap of a twig or rustle of a bush sending shivers down his spine. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. Henry froze, eyes wide as a wild animal. Its eyes gleaming in the torchlight, lunged at him. Instinct and adrenaline took over. He swung the torch, fought with branches, and wrestled the creature with all his strength. After a terrifying struggle, he managed to kill it, but not without cost. Blood ran down his arms and legs, and pain radiated from deep cuts. Stumbling back to the hut, he collapsed in front of Mateo, who immediately pressed leaves and cloth against the wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. Fear, exhaustion, and pain mingled with relief. They realized that survival on the island was not just a battle against hunger and exposure, it was a fight against the wild itself. The next morning, the island was bathed in a pale, gray light, and the air was heavy with moisture from the previous storm. Henry, injured and weak, rested in their makeshift hut, while Mateo knew survival depended on securing food. He set out into the dense forest, moving cautiously over uneven terrain and through thick undergrowth. Every step was a reminder of the dangers lurking. Hidden roots, venomous insects, and the occasional distant growl of an unseen predator. His mind raced, thinking of Henry's injuries and the need to find sustenance quickly. Slowly, he began identifying edible plants, fruits, and roots, testing each carefully before gathering. Hours passed as he foraged, his fingers bleeding from thorns, sweat and grime streaking his face. Despite the fatigue, Mateo pressed on, motivated by determination and loyalty to his friend. Along the way, he spotted small signs of wildlife, crabs scuttling near the shore, fish in shallow pools, and improvised traps using sticks and leaves. By afternoon, he returned to the hut carrying his meager but precious finds. Henry, despite his pain, managed a weak smile, gratitude shining through his exhaustion. They shared the fruits and plants, eating slowly to conserve energy. The small meal felt like a triumph, a reminder that resourcefulness and hope could turn even the direst circumstances into survival. Though they were battered, hungry, and far from rescue, Mateo and Henry found strength in their unity, realizing that their bond was as vital to survival as any food or shelter. Days blurred into one another as Henry and Mateo settled into a harsh rhythm of survival. Each morning brought new challenges, storms that soaked their fragile hut, the relentless sun that sapped their strength, and the ever-present hunger gnawing at their bellies. Henry's wounds throbbed constantly, reminding them of the previous night's encounter with the wild, yet he refused to give in to despair. Mateo continued foraging, scavenging the forest for fruits, roots, and edible plants, each day learning more about the island's hidden resources. Together, they improvised, using leaves for insulation, broken branches for shelter reinforcement, and vines to make simple tools. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the cries of nocturnal creatures and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Still, they encouraged each other, sharing stories, memories, and small jokes that kept morale alive despite exhaustion. Even in the harshest moments, their friendship became a lifeline. When a sudden downpour soaked them to the bone, they huddled close under the hut's fragile roof, shivering but determined not to surrender. Every minor victory, finding a new fruit, mending the shelter, or successfully fishing, felt monumental. They were learning the language of the island, how to track signs of animals, where fresh water could be found, which plants were safe, and how to move quietly to avoid danger. Slowly, their fear transformed into cautious respect for the wilderness around them. Though the island remained unforgiving, Henry and Mateo discovered that endurance, hope, and ingenuity could carve a path through even the most relentless adversity. One afternoon, as Henry and Mateo explored the island's interior in search of more reliable food sources, Henry slipped on a moss-covered rock near a stream. He fell hard, a sharp pain shooting through his leg, leaving him unable to stand. Mateo rushed to his side, panic briefly flashing in his eyes. Together, they assessed the injury. It was swollen, bruised, and likely sprained. Mateo tore strips from his shirt and fashioned a makeshift bandage and splint, carefully immobilizing Henry's leg. The process was slow, painstaking, and painful, but Henry gritted his teeth, determined to cooperate. Their teamwork was instinctive. Mateo supported his friend as they slowly made their way back to the hut, helping him over rocks and through underbrush. Back at the shelter, they rested, tending to the wound and keeping it clean with the limited resources they had. This incident reinforced a critical truth. Survival was impossible alone, and trust and cooperation were paramount. Over the following days, they adjusted their routines to accommodate Henry's limited mobility. Mateo took on the heavier tasks of foraging and gathering water, while Henry focused on smaller but vital chores, reinforcing their shelter, tending the fire, and preparing meals. Despite the physical strain and psychological stress, the experience strengthened their bond. They shared quiet moments of reflection, talking about home, family, and the unlikely journey that had led them here. Each night, as they huddled together under the hut, they felt a growing sense of resilience. Even amidst injury, exhaustion, and danger, they were learning that survival depended on resourcefulness, courage, and unwavering teamwork. After several grueling days on the island, Henry and Mateo began scanning the horizon more carefully, hoping for a sign of rescue. One afternoon, as they reached the island's highest cliff, Mateo spotted a distant helicopter glinting in the sunlight. Heart pounding, he shouted for Henry, who struggled to the cliff with Mateo's support. Their minds raced. This was their chance, but they had to act quickly. They gathered dry branches, leaves, and any flammable debris from the forest floor. Their movements hurried yet precise. Using friction and a small spark from a piece of metal they had salvaged, Mateo managed to ignite a small flame. It grew, fed by their careful piling of kindling. Smoke began to curl into the sky, dark and visible against the bright afternoon. Adrenaline surged as they waved frantically, jumping and shouting, trying to attract attention. The helicopter hovered closer, its blades cutting through the roar of the waves and wind. They maintained the fire, adding more branches to ensure the smoke remained thick and visible. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, anxiety clawing at their chests. Then, relief washed over them as they saw the rescuers spot the smoke, nodding and preparing to land nearby. Exhausted, they collapsed against each other, smiles breaking through the grime and weariness. For the first time since the storm, hope replaced fear. The fire had become a bridge between the island and safety, a symbol of their endurance, ingenuity, and unwavering determination to survive against the odds. The helicopter descended toward the rocky shore, its rotors whipping the air into a frenzy of sand, leaves, and saltwater spray. Henry and Mateo shielded their eyes, their hearts hammering with disbelief and joy. Rescue personnel, geared in bright uniforms, rappelled down swiftly, checking the surroundings before approaching. Mateo helped Henry to his feet, each step careful and deliberate, supporting his friend as they navigated the uneven ground. The rescuers assessed their condition quickly, noting injuries, exhaustion, and dehydration. First aid was administered on the spot. Henry's wounds were cleaned and bandaged more thoroughly, while Mateo received attention for cuts and abrasions sustained during the storm and foraging. The friends felt a strange mixture of relief, gratitude, and lingering tension, the adrenaline of survival slowly giving way to exhaustion. As they were lifted toward the helicopter, the island below shrank into a patch of dense forest and jagged rocks, a place that had tested their limits, taught them resilience, and strengthened their bond. From above, the endless sea stretched out like a dark, threatening blanket, a reminder of how fragile their existence had been. They exchanged a look, silent acknowledgement of the trials endured and the unspoken promise that they had faced this ordeal together. As the helicopter lifted them toward safety, the sun glinted off the water, and the friends finally allowed themselves to breathe, tears mingling with the grime on their faces. Survival was no longer a fight. It was a victory, and they had each other to thank.